everybody, welcome to the first edition of Kevin's Baking and Canning, Blue Ribbon Baking and Canning. I'm your host, Kevin Holland, and I'll be happy to get started here with baking essentials and optional items that are extremely important. But before we do get started, let me give you a little background on myself and how I got involved in this really great hobby. You may ask, why would a tough, gun-toting, Peloton riding, former Navy pilot get into bread baking and canning? Well, that's a good question. So let me tell you. I've always had, for the past 20 years or so anyway, a large interest in cooking, so I think bread making was a natural extension of that. And as far as canning and food preservation goes, well, I'm a big gardener too, so I've often had excellent harvests of cucumbers, tomatoes, squash, etc., that I've looked for ways that I'd be able to preserve that food and enjoy it in the wintertime as well. And I've had a lot of fun and success doing that. So I want to share some tips with you in this series of videos to see if you can pick up on some of these items and also improve your game to the point where you may in fact want to enter a county or state competition yourself. So let's get started. Our very first important item for bread making is going to be your mixer. And this beauty right here is the Ankerström, made in Sweden. It can handle up to 2 to 3 pounds of bread dough at a time, which is far more capacity than you have in a typical KitchenAid. The Ankerström is very different though than KitchenAid. Let me show you. As you can see, the bowl itself moves and the roller is driven by the bowl. In future shows, you'll be able to see the Ank in action. Probably the second most important item is a good digital scale. You absolutely have to have one of these because you want to make sure in bread baking or any kind of baking at all that you do your measurements by weight as opposed to volume. And what I mean by volume is a typical cup or 2 cup measurement. Most recipes will have your measurements in grams or ounces, and that's fine. Convert to grams or ounces on your digital scale. If for some reason you don't have a conversion and it's simply in cups or ounces, my recommendation is to go to the King Arthur baking page. They have a conversion table there. It's probably the most accurate, but you'll see different grams of flour weight, for example, for different types of flour. So go to the King Arthur site if you don't have a gram measurement in your recipe. The other key, absolutely essential item that you must have is a digital instant read thermometer. Because while there are many ways to tell if your bread loaf is done, this is the absolute best way to do it. Typically, you're looking for an internal temperature of 190 to 200, and the only way you're going to know that is by checking with the digital thermometer. So get one of these. Other absolute essential items that you're going to have, you're going to have the dough cutter. This has got a fairly sharp knife on it, and while you're dividing your dough into pieces for rolls, for example, or splitting a loaf, you want to make sure you have one of these. Dough cutter. Next up is dough scraper. This one is pretty cool because it's made especially for your Ank bowl. You can scrape inside the bowl and get all the dough, whatever else you've put in there. So you want to make sure you have your scraper with you. Key. Silicone mat. You got to have it, folks, because while you're doing your work, dividing your dough, doing your final shapes, you want to make sure that you have something other than your counter to put your dough on and work it and divide it. This is a great thing to have. Absolutely essential to have. Now we talked a little bit about volume versus weight. It's still a good measuring cups and measuring spoons. Measuring spoon is great, but you don't want to weigh out a 1/4 teaspoon or something. You can grab this real quick and use it. So get a good set of these. Another thing I found that's absolutely essential is have a good set of mixing bowls. You're going to need to mix the dough. You're going to need to mix dry ingredients. You're going to need to mix wet ingredients. You want to make sure that you have your small add-on ingredients available so that you can already weighed out, put them right in the recipe. So have these handy. And talking about working your dough, as initially you're mixing in your dry ingredients, for example, you want to have some type of a whisk so you can mix and incorporate all those dry ingredients together before you put them in. And obviously this is great for doing your eggs that you add to the recipe, or an egg white, for example. We all know what these babies are, and you're going to need them as you do your final and pre-shaping on any type of loaf. This is a great one. It's tapered on the end. That way you can contour your shape as you want. This is a really, really good one too, especially for pastry baking, because you can roll out the dough to any specific width that you want simply by removing these rings. So you can go to probably what we have here is about a ½ inch initially, could go down to probably about an 1/8 of an inch. So this is a great thing to have. Not essential, but it's great. Essential item, gotta have it, a good bread knife, because when you're done, you want to make sure after your bread loaf cools that you're able to slice it easily, quickly, and a key high quality bread knife is essential. Right up with there, it wouldn't be an essential bread baking item unless we talk about pans. Now, not every loaf you're going to do is a pan loaf. We're going to do some freeform loaves, and I'll show you the baking stone. We'll talk about that later. But the essential pans that you want to have to start out with, you want to make sure you have the 8x4 pan. You want to make sure you have the 9x5 pan. Probably a good, this is a 9-inch round baking dish. And this is my favorite. This is a 13-inch Pullman pan with a lid. As you can see, the lid can roll way off. You can bake with it on, bake with it off. The Pullman name comes from these pans were really developed for the railroad industry. They wanted to bake bread in the food cart, and they wanted to keep it as small and compact as possible. So on later shows, we'll be doing Pullman loaves, and you'll see how that works. And our final essential item is going to be a good baking stone, because as I mentioned, you won't do all of your loaves in a pan. Some will be freeform or boulettes or batards, and particularly for sourdough, and you want to have a good baking stone to put those on. Now that we've covered the essential items, let's get into some of the items that are really nice to have, but you don't necessarily need to get started. Now we're going to cover some non-essential baking items. And when I say non-essential, I mean you don't need these to get started right away, but you'll find as your journey goes on, you get a little bit better, you want to improve the process. Having some of these items are really going to help you out. And the first major one I want to point out to you is Broad & Taylor bread proofer. It's a big box here, it seems big and bulky, but I'll show you how it works. You can adjust the temperature down here and up as necessary. You can see right here, easy to use. Typically you want to proof somewhere around 75 to 80 degrees, sometimes higher. There are other methods for proofing. For instance, a lot of the modern ovens like we have here have a bread proof setting. However, before you use that bread proof setting, make sure you put a thermometer in and check the actual temperature. Sometimes the proof settings get very high. You don't want anything over 95 degrees to 100 degrees, that's like the max. So check your temperature. If you don't have a proof setting, you don't have a proofer, one thing you can do, great tip, is simply put the loaf in the oven that you want to rise, and turn the oven light on. The oven light itself will heat the internal temperature to the oven to around 80 degrees, which is normally just right for proofing. This is big and bulky. I'll show you how it works. One advantage is the Yank bowl. You can mix your dough right in here, and when it comes time for bulk proofing or final proofing, simply slip it right in. And we're ready to break it down for storage. It's very easy. There you go. Another nice to have item is what I call a micro strainer shaker. This is great to put your powdered sugar or flour in. If you want to do a little decorative finish to your bread, simply put it right in here and do a little tap action. Can't be replaced. Absolutely essential in the sourdough world is the bread lame, or as we say in France, lame. This is a razor blade, as you can see, right attached to this fancy handle. This is key for scoring your sourdough bread, or any bread that you're going to need to score. And when I say score, that is open the loaf up, which allows for expansion while the loaf is in the oven. It will give you that nice sourdough effect. Speaking of sourdough, there's a lot of items that we're going to cover here, talk about sourdough here and there. We're going to do an entire show, folks, sourdough from beginning to end. So we won't get too hung up on it, but you can certainly use this for yeasty breads as well. And speaking of sourdough, this is the dough whisk. This is good for yeasty bread or sourdough, but your initial mix, when you're doing sourdough, this is a great thing to do to initially get your flour, your wet ingredients, and your dry ingredients incorporated. Finally, our nice to have options. There's saran wrap, cling wrap, various other things you can use to cover your loaf while it's proofing in the proofer or in the refrigerator. This is nothing more than your basic shower cap. I ordered these things. They're great. They could expand, fit around any bowl. I'll show you right here on the angle how it does. It's perfect. Covering, keeps the moisture in the dough while it's proofing. I got a bag of like 500 of these, and when I saw it, I thought, I'll never use them. I'm out right now. So you constantly use things. It's a great thing to have. And our final nice to have items we have are these wicker baskets here, otherwise known as bannetons. This is the circular one for your brulee. This is for your betard. You can do your shape, and you can use these for yeasty bread, but basically you use these for sourdough that we're going to do our final proofing overnight, usually in the refrigerator. You put your loaf in here, turn it out, and do your scoring and baking the next day. Absolute, do you need to have these? Could you use a regular plastic bowl, something like that? You could do that, but the wicker in these really helps extract some of the moisture. It also gives you that beautiful design on the outside of your loaf that you're not going to get anywhere else. So again, sourdough related primarily, and we'll talk about sourdough on one of our later shows. Well, that's it for optional items, folks, and baking essentials. Really had a good time doing this show, but before we go, we didn't get a chance to bake today, but we are going to have a chance to look at these. Here's some beautiful soufflé cream cheese rolls that I baked up yesterday. And to go along with those, we're going to have some wonderful pineapple jam. I don't know if you can get a quick look at that beautiful color. And the set and headspace is perfect. We're going to talk about canning essentials and the canning process in one of our next shows. But this is the part I've been waiting for. Good. Great seal. Take one of these cream cheese soufflé rolls. I'm not going to lie to you folks. That's good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in today. Look forward to tuning in next week. We're going to talk about canning, food preservation, basics, and essential items and optional items. Please, please, please subscribe to my YouTube page. Make sure you leave any comments, questions you may have. We'll be posting links to the recipe up on the page. And also links such as I mentioned, King Arthur Baking. I'll put that up there for you and use that as a handy reference. So until next time, folks, may all your loaves rise and all your jars seal. Thanks for stopping by.